så vi lämnar över nu till David Black-Schaffer som är biträdande lektor i Uppsala Universitet och som har personlig erfarenhet av att ge en kurs där han använder nätet, videoinspelningar och liknande. Så David ska berätta. Det här föredraget håller på engelska, men Davids svenska är väldigt bra, så ni kan ställa frågor på svenska, ni behöver inte känna er begränsade av att gå över till engelska. Varsågod David.
Thank you very much. So I'm David Black-Schaffer, and what I'm going to talk to you about today is sort of my hobby project. I'm teaching at a university, which means I'm only judged on research, but I think teaching is really important. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is how I've taken some of the technology that's typically used in a MOOC course and brought it into the classroom to improve teaching in class. And I think this is very important and fits in well with what we're talking about today, because this is one way in which we can improve our quality of teaching so that we have a chance to compete with these online courses. Let me start out with a little bit of motivation for why I've made the changes that I'm going to tell you about. And the motivation comes to the first time I taught in Sweden, which was about 2 years ago. Taught an introductory computer architecture class, had a bunch of students in it, and they loved the class. Great reviews. They thought it was fun. They liked the lectures. They thought it was well organized. Really good feedback that I was doing everything right as a teacher. And then I went and looked at the exam, and well, half of them failed the exam. So, according to the way we're evaluated on teaching, student evaluations, I was doing a great job, but the students weren't learning. And the question I had to myself is, what's going on here, and how can I fix this? So my hypothesis was the class was entertaining. They told me that in the feedback. They enjoyed the lectures, but it wasn't demanding. And I wanted to stop and think, okay, well, what is going on when I give a good lecture? Is this a good way to teach? So if I look at my class, and let's take a 90-minute class, and let's be really optimistic. Let's say I get 10 questions in the class in 3 minutes each. I'm spending 30 minutes of my class answering questions. That's a third of the time the students are interacting with me. So that's a lot of questions, but that looks pretty good. The students are doing something in the class a third of the time. But of course, it doesn't quite work that way. For every question, the student spends a minute and I spend 2 minutes, so now we're down to, 11% of the time interacting. Okay, it's still more than 10% of the time I'm actually doing something other than talking to the students. But now we go and say, but there are 30 students in the class. So if you work this out, I had a great lecture class. The students loved it. I spent a third of my time answering questions, and on average, each student spent 20 seconds of their time doing something other than sitting there passively. So, good lecture, a third of my time answering questions, 99.6% passive for the students. So the takeaway lesson for me was, hey, I'm giving great lectures, but this is too passive. This isn't really helping the students learn. And so the question that I need to ask myself is, if I get the students to be more active, will they learn more? And I hope everybody has this sort of feeling that, yeah, of course they should learn more if you get them to be more active. But what I want to show you is a really neat study that was done in 2011 that looked at this in detail. And what they did was they took about 540 students in a quantum mechanics class, they divided them into 2 groups, and they tested them beforehand. The groups were statistically identical. And half of the class got regular lectures. So these were lectures from an experienced, well-rated professor. Sounds like the sort of stuff that I was doing. The other half of the class got 3 hours of peer instruction. So this was, instead of giving them lectures, people came in and handed out in the classroom, here's a set of problems, sit down with the person next to you, work on the first problem, discuss it, and then we'll talk about it and then go on to the next problem. No lectures. And they evaluated how they did in these 2 different types of teaching. So they looked at the first group. These are the ones who got lectures, and here's the score that they got on their tests. So not very encouraging, but if you don't have a baseline, hard to compare to. When they switched from having a good lecturer in the class to doing this peer instruction where the students were spending their time actively working on the problems, here's the improvement they saw. Again, 540 students. This isn't a statistical fluke. This is a tremendous improvement. This is 2.5 standard deviations improvement in learning. This is amazing. It should be criminal for us to not use this sort of teaching techniques if they exist and can improve things this much. They also measured a bunch of other neat stuff. Attendance went up 20% when they started teaching this way. People came to class more. And engagement increased. They had people sitting there watching who was falling asleep. 40% more students were not falling asleep. So this was really improving what was going on. And as I said before, this is amazing. And when I saw this, my reaction was, aha, now I know how to fix my class. I need to stop giving those great lectures that the students enjoy so much and start having them work on the material in class. And the question that I looked into, and the reason I'm here talking about this, is can I use the sort of technology that we have in MOOCs in order to do this in my classroom? And the technique here is called flipping the classroom. And just out of curiosity, how many of you guys in the audience have heard this term before? Okay, about 3/4 or two-thirds of you guys. So that's typical. Most people have heard about this. So what this is, for those of you who haven't heard about it, is we take a traditional classroom. We have students working at home, and we have them working in class. And in class, you listen to a lecture. I mean, that's what you do. You come to class and you give a lecture, just like I'm doing now. And at home, you go and you solve problems. So students have a textbook, they have a bunch of problems they should work on, or they have problem sets or essays to write, but they're doing that at home. The problem here is that listening to lectures is a passive activity. They're not doing this actively. And solving problems is active learning. They're working on stuff. So you've got these two parts of learning, and look where we put our resources. Here's the teacher. The teacher is sitting there with them in the classroom while they're learning passively. Okay, this is not a good use of that resource. We've got this teacher who knows how to work on the problems, knows how to help the students, and the teacher is sitting there in the classroom when they're doing things passively, instead of at home when they actually are doing active learning and can use the help. Okay, this is the traditional setup for teaching, and in flipped classroom we basically say, let's switch this. So now we're going to do this active learning in class when we've got the teacher there. So we've got a much better use of the teacher as a resource for teaching here. And the passive stuff, the lecture at home, well, it's passive, but they're also alone. So, at least it's a better use of our teacher. What I'm interested in doing here is throwing technology into this. Can I use the sort of stuff that MOOCs have? And MOOCs do this stuff just online, but I want to do this to benefit my classroom to make this picture better. So I'm still going to have solving problems and being active in class with the teacher, but now we're going to have interactive lectures. So I'm going to take these passive lectures that students were doing before at home, and I'm going to make them active using that sort of technology. They're still doing it alone, but at least now it's active learning. The other thing I'm going to really focus on is looking at the problem with the teacher. So we've got 100 students in our class and one teacher. That doesn't scale up very well. But if I can use those other students, I can say you've got 100 peers in the classroom also. How can I get them to work together? So I want to focus on switching this around, having most of the interaction with the students be between other students. So this scales up much more nicely. I can have a class with 100 students because most of the time they're helping each other. And so this is the goal of what I'm trying to do. I want to get all of the learning in the class to be active, and I want to get peers involved as much as possible to make it easy for the teacher to handle large classes. All right, so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about flipped classroom. Now, what do I mean when I say an interactive lecture? So this isn't new. This is what these MOOCs have been doing for a long time, for a year and a half now. But the basic idea is to take short lecture segments with self-assessment quizzes. So if you've ever tried to sit down and watch a 45-minute lecture online, it's really hard. It's very hard to pay attention for 45 minutes in a row, and the technique here is just cut it up. So we're going to have a short video segment, we're going to have a short quiz, short video segment, short quiz, and when I say short, I mean 5 to 10 minutes for the video. So not a long chunk of video. Then just a few questions, 1 to 2 questions, and then you repeat this throughout the entire lecture. So this is what I mean by an interactive lecture, and I'll give you some examples of this later. But before we go on to the examples, everybody should be asking the question, does this actually help? So if you split up your lecture, does it help with learning? And I hope most of you have this intuitive feeling that if I chop up a 45-minute lecture into small parts and I force myself to answer questions, yeah, that should make me pay attention better. That should help my learning. And there was a recent study on this which said, yeah, it does work. So they looked at what's going on here. They found that they doubled the number of notes that students took when they put in these quizzes into lectures. They found that they improved how much they learned at the end by about 20% just by doing this. Not nearly as big an impact as that flipped classroom stuff I showed you before, but still another 20% in improvement. That's significant. So increase in notes, better learning. Also 50% decrease in mind wandering. Means 50% less of the time students got distracted and bored and stopped paying attention. That's really significant. If you could get your students to pay attention 50% more, that alone would be worth using this sort of stuff for. So yes, these sort of interactive lectures are a good way to teach. They help with teaching. So I'm interested in flipping the classroom here. What are my goals? Well, I want to use the teacher time to help teach, not read the book. If you think about what a really good lecture is, it's an exciting reading of a textbook, because we all have good textbooks. We don't need to read that out loud to the students. And I want to do this by maximizing interactive learning, and that graph I showed you before, that's sort of why I think this is such a good idea. So this is not a new idea. I mean, 2/3 of you already had heard about flipped classroom before. This has been going on for a long time. In the 1990s, this was shown to be the right way to teach physics. Just tremendous improvements in learning physics by doing this. In 2000, Baker coined the phrase, sage on the stage to guide on the side. That's the idea. Instead of me being the all-knowing, all-powerful professor talking to you guys, I should get out of the way come out with you and help you learn the material yourself, and that's a better way to teach. And of course, there are things like the Khan Academy, which provides all sorts of online interactive learning for all sorts of subjects. So my goal here is what's called hybrid or blended learning. I'm trying to combine the best of online teaching and in-class teaching, and in particular, I want to use the information I get from the online lectures to improve and direct my in-class teaching. All right, so what did I do? So I had two parts of my class. I had a part at home and a part in class. And at home, the students went off and they had to watch the lectures before coming to class. I told them they were required. They had to watch these before coming to class, and I checked. I mean, the computer keeps track of who's watched what. So these were the same sort of interactive lectures I told you about before, short 5 to 10 minute video segments. And during those video lectures, they answered 10 to 20 questions. So every student in the class was answering 10 to 20 self-assessment questions for every lecture before they came to class. Then when they came to class, I'd review these quizzes. So I get the results of these. I know which questions students did well on, which ones they didn't do well on. I can spend time in class reviewing the stuff they had problems with. I can also answer questions. These are online lectures. They can ask questions while they're watching them. I, as the teacher, get these questions before I come to class, and I can answer them in class. I can prepare ahead of time. I know what questions students have before I come to class, which is great as a teacher. Then I spend the rest of the time doing these peer practice problems. So this is getting rid of the lecture. This is giving them problems to work on. They work in small groups, and I help them with it. All right, so that's what I did. And now I'm going to go and give you a demo from a course that we're teaching now. So we're teaching this way this spring. This is a collaboration with SIX and with Nile University in Egypt to put together this platform. And this spring we have a class with about 130 students that we're teaching this way. And I want to walk you through it a little bit and show you what we're actually doing in the classroom. All right, so here's the student's view of this. And from the student's point of view, this isn't particularly exciting. It's just, hey, it's an online video lecture. And you see over here, you can see the different lectures they have in the class. In this particular one, the first lecture is 53 minutes long, has 17 questions. Second one's an hour and 18 and has 25 questions. They can see which parts of the lecture they've gone through. They get a little check mark when they finish them. And then you just have this video playing of the lecture here. And if you notice down there, there are questions in the lecture. So it tells you there are 2 questions in this lecture and where they are. Oops. We can go ahead and play it here. Variables and put the results in register 2. So here's the code for update. You've seen this before. This is just doing our 2 operations and then doing the subtraction of the 2 of them. And then when we're done, we return from our procedure call. So here's a question. What's going to happen to the variable a in main when we call update? So we get to the question here, and this question appears here. And the students go through, and they can then click on these answers and answer the question and get feedback about how it's working. And that's how I get information back to me on what actually happens in the class. After they've done that, they can go ahead and click play, and it will go ahead and give them the answer. So to understand this, we want to take a look at who's using what register. So main over here has A and R20, and we're using R20 up here for our comparison. But look what update is doing. Update is using R20 for one of these temporary variables. So what I get here is I get this interactive lecture where the question just appears. The students can click on the answer when they're taking it. They get feedback on the answer, and they go on. While they're watching this here, they can also click on a confused button if they're confused. They can click on a little question mark here and just type in a question if they have a question while they're playing it. So from the student's point of view, this isn't all that exciting. It's just you watch a video and questions appear and you get to click in the video. What gets interesting about this is when we get into the teacher's side of things. So here's the teacher's view of this class. So you can see for this lecture here, we had about 115 students who completed on time, 7 who finished it late, 2 of them watched less than half. You can see how many students watched it. We then get to see for all the questions in the class how the students answered them. So we can go through and see how students did. So here's a question the students didn't do so well on that. You can see for this question here, about 50 students answered it correctly, but about 60 students chose the wrong answer there. And so we get this feedback about how students are doing with the questions. You can also see a lot of other information about this. So here's a display of the course during the lecture as a function of time. Make the window a little bigger. You can see here's the time at the bottom, and you see 4 things here. You see where the students clicked that confused button. You see where they went back in their video, where they paused their video, and where they asked questions. And I can scroll through the whole lecture and get a feeling for where students had questions about the lecture and what was going on. So I can go in and say, okay, at this point in the lecture, students clicked that they were confused in here. And if I go ahead and click on that, it will go ahead, assuming that YouTube works, and bring you to the point in the video where that actually happened. You can also see down here which questions they had. So here's a question that was asked this time in the video. They asked, why don't we add 4 to the new PC? This has to do with the question that's going on. I can see where they were asking questions and what the questions were during the video. I also get to see which students have actually done all the work. I can see this student did all of them, but these ones were late. And this is important for making sure students actually do the stuff. I can go in here and I can see surveys for students. So at the end of each lecture, we put in a survey asking students how they did in the course, or what they thought of this particular lecture. See, most of them thought the speed was just fine, and we get a lot of feedback on them. So this is the feedback we got from one lecture for all the students. This is a huge amount of feedback for a single lecture. And in order to make this feedback more useful, we allow you to respond to it. So here's a question a student had about how does something work. And you can click on that question, and you can type in a response as a teacher. And now this is anonymous feedback to the students. And when you respond, they'll get an email saying, hey, you asked an anonymous question. The teacher doesn't know who you are. Here's a response to your question. If you want to follow up, you have to tell the teacher who you are. But this way, we can give a lot more feedback to students. We allow you to say, hey, this was the same question as this one down here. You can check them both and respond once to multiple questions. Because we're getting so much feedback, we need tools to make it easier to handle it with the teachers. So that's the part for reviewing how students were doing on the material. Now you want to use this when you come into class. So we have this other view for the teacher where they can display the results of quizzes and questions and surveys and review them before they come to class. So if you want to review what's going on, you can first look through, here are all the quizzes, and I can check off on the side here the ones I do or don't want to show in class. So if students did really well, here almost everyone got this right. I don't want to spend time reviewing this in class. I can basically hide it from reviewing in class. I can do the same thing with questions. Here are all the questions that were asked during that lecture. And I can look at them. OK, well, this question up here, this is about an error on the slide. That's good for me to know, but it's not important to talk about in class. So I can go ahead and hide that one. Once I've gone through and figured out what I want to talk about, we then have a view which lets you go through this material in class. So here we are looking at the questions that were asked. Here's the exact point in the lecture where students asked these questions. And here are 4 students who asked 4 different questions at this point. So I can take this slide here, and I can say, hey, here's the information. I can come right up in front of you in class and very quickly say, a bunch of you had this question. Let me go through it. I don't have to prepare stuff. It's all in the system. And I can do the same thing for the questions. So here's a question. Everybody got it right. OK, so I don't need to spend a lot of time on this. But I've got the video here, and I can go ahead to the next slide. And this way, I can quickly review the material. And what I learned about what students know and had problems with online, I can do that in class. So that's how we use the system in class. When you want to actually put stuff into the system, you go ahead and you create your class, and it's sort of basically what you'd expect. You've got a little button for add lecture, add quiz. You put in a link to your video. We put our videos on YouTube. You can put them anywhere you want. You go to the point in the video where the quiz is, and you just click on the screen to put in the buttons. So here are the buttons for this question, and when you click on them, it will let you go in and say, hey, this is the correct answer, and you can put in explanations, and those are the explanations the students get when they answer them correctly or incorrectly. OK? So that's the system that we have. And now I'm going to talk a little about what it takes to use it and some experiences from doing it. So how do you go about taking your lectures, and if you want to add this interactivity so that you can get this feedback from the students online? So here's the lecture as it starts out for me. I've just got a whole bunch of slides. I happen to use PowerPoint. And the first step is to divide them up into these 5 to 10-minute chunks, because we don't want to have a long recorded video segment. So you go ahead and divide them up. Then we're going to go in and add section titles. We've got to give some organization so the students know what they're going to learn in each section. And then from there, we just need to go in and add the questions. So you go through each one of these sections. You figure out, well, where can I go ahead and insert questions in them? And after you've done that, you've now got a lecture with all the questions in it. And now you're ready to record it. This adding questions is the hard part. This is the part of this process that takes time. You have to go through each of these sections. You have to figure out what are the key questions. Then you have to figure out good ways to formulate them so they don't take too much of the student's time, but they still help figure out, did the students understand the basic thing? And this can also be frustrating for you as a teacher. So if you look at what happened here, I didn't find any questions for the first part of this lecture. So if I couldn't identify what were the 1 or 2 key concepts in 10 minutes of lecture time, should I be wasting the student's time on this? Is it worth my time? Is it worth the student's time to go through this if I, as the teacher, don't know how I'd ask them if they understood what I just said? And so from a teacher's point of view, this forces me to evaluate, am I actually teaching the right stuff? Am I doing a good job of putting this together? So what did we end up with? So we had these interactive lectures. We had these questions that were in the videos, and when the students click on the answers, they get immediate feedback. Was this correct? Was this wrong? We have all of these questions that they get throughout all the lectures, and they have the ability to ask questions and click confused and go through that sort of stuff to give us feedback about the lectures. So all in all, we're getting interactivity in the lectures, and we're collecting data we can use to improve what we're doing in class. Now, I showed you this in the class that I teach. It's a computer science class. But the potential to do this is really all over the place. So let's say you wanted to do this in economics. You want to talk about supply and demand. Do the students understand how the curves change? So we can have in our video a little curve here. We can show them supply. We can ask them a question. Draw an arrow showing what happens to price as the demand changes. And here's how the demand is changing. And now the students go in, and what do? They're going to draw an arrow on the screen. And if they go ahead and they draw the arrow in the right place, you can give them the same sort of feedback. Tell them, yeah, that's right. And now the video can continue, and it can explain to them why that was correct. So they're interacting with the material. If they draw the arrow in the wrong place, you can tell them why that was the wrong place. So again, making the video interactive. You can do the same thing for other subjects. So say we want to test if people understood the events that led up to the beginning of, say, the First World War. We can give them a bunch of events, and we can tell them put them in order. And the student can go through and drag these events into order, and once they've got them all in order, the system's going to go through and tell them if they got it right. So in this case, got a bunch of them right, but one of them wrong. And now we can provide feedback to the students, telling them, hey, this is why you were wrong there. And now they get to understand where their confusion came from. And they can go and reorder them again until they get it right. So they're playing with this information, they're getting a better feeling for it. You could do the same thing in art. So we want to know what the difference between the Rococo and the Baroque period were. One of the big things there was color palettes. We can show a picture and we can ask them identify the colors. And the students can go through and they can click on which colors were there. And if they get it right, we can give them feedback. And if they get it wrong, we can give them feedback about why those are the wrong answers. So we've seen 3 different places we can do this in economics, history, and art. And of course, we showed you examples in computer science. And the point I want to make is this works across lots of fields. There are lots of different types of questions. I don't have all the answers. I can give you my experience for what worked well in computer science, but I need to learn from other people in other fields what sort of questions do they use? How does this work for their subject? So now we've covered all about how to do this interactive lecture stuff and how it works. How do you use this to improve stuff in class? So I showed you this graph from the system that we use. You look through the results and you can say, hey, these questions the students got right. I don't need to spend any time on these in class. This one here, not so good. I'll spend some time if I have time. But this one down here, if you look at it, most people got the wrong answer. So I should definitely spend time reviewing this in class. And you know, honestly, this is a hint that I should go back and fix the lecture. There's something not working in the way I'm teaching here if most of the students got the wrong answer there. So this is good information for me on how to improve my class. And it also tells me where I should spend time before I come to class. I know what students understood and what they didn't understand. We also have this view that shows you where students had trouble. You can see during the time in the lecture where they're confused, where they rewound the video, where there were pauses. We can see where they asked questions, and we can go in and see directly in the video where those questions were asked to understand the context of those questions. It allows us to understand where problems are in the lecture, which allows us to improve the lecture. So this is a key thing if we want to improve our qualities. We have to understand what we need to do better. Then we want to use this data in class. So I showed you these 2 views, and this is what we do in class. We literally project this stuff up on the screen. And we say, OK, now we're going to review the problems you had difficulty on. And you can go through it. You see what the results of the quiz were, and you have just the video that they watched. So you've got the video there, so when you're in the classroom teaching, if there's an animation in the video, you can step through that animation since you've got the video right there. You don't have to go back and forth between PowerPoint and the online system. You've got it all in one place to make it easy for teachers to use this. The same thing for student questions. I showed you all these student questions, how they're all in one place, and you can get to exactly where they are to give answers to the students. So this allows you to use the information you get from the online experience easily in class. All right, so how did I do this in class? Well, I told you we reviewed these self-assessment quizzes first. These were the quizzes in the videos. Spent some time going over the student questions and the feedback they had, and then worked on the practice problems. So reviewing what they did in the lecture is great because I know what they had trouble with before I come to class. It allows me to use my class time efficiently and only review the stuff the students actually need being reviewed. For the student questions and feedback, I can prepare ahead of time. This is great for me and the students. I had a student who asked me, well, gee, how do carbon nanotubes improve computers? It has nothing to do with the class, but I know before I come to class that a student had that question, I can go to Wikipedia, grab a few pictures, put together a slide, and show them the answers. And the students really appreciate this. It means they get reinforcement for asking questions, and they ask more questions. So you build this trust with the students that you're listening, and this is a double-edged sword. When you answer their questions, they ask more questions. I'm already getting more questions than I can handle. Do I want to encourage them to ask more? And I don't know the answer here, and they don't know. This is a new form of teaching and learning for all of us, and we're trying to figure out what the norms here are. Then in class, we do the practice problems. This is just the standard peer instruction. They get small problems, they work in groups, and we help them through them. So I want to point out here that this bottom part, this is the goal of everything I've been doing. It's to get this interactivity in the class, get my lecture out of the classroom. All this other stuff up here, this is for free. All of this information up here that helps me understand where I need to improve my lectures, understand how to use my classroom time better, and get more feedback and interactivity with the students, all of that is just because they're watching the stuff online. I can collect the data, and I can display it to the teachers in a usable way. That's for free. So when we do this in-class peer learning, what do? I just hand out paper problems to everyone. Distribute it around the classroom, project the problem up on the board, give an introduction to it, and then say, get to it. And they start working on it, and I go around and ask them and help them with questions. This works great for a small class. In a larger class, you have to have a bunch of TAs. The class we ran right now had 132 students, and with 3 TAs in the classroom, it worked okay. When you're done, just walk through the answer to the problem and explain it, and this is how you get the active learning with the peers. So this is the interactive part. This is how we use the classroom time better. So what were the results? Well, I set out to increase student interaction, and I showed you before we had about 20 seconds per student on a good day. I'm now up to 60 minutes per lecture. They spend about 10 to 20 minutes answering the online questions before they come to class, and they spend about 45 minutes in class going through these peer practice problems. So I've dramatically increased how much time students are working in class. Every student now is coming to class having already answered 10 to 20 questions about the material. They are much more prepared. It makes it much easier to work on these problems in class knowing that they put in that effort. And the students loved it. They really liked having this stuff online. They liked the in-class problem solving, and there was a lot of feedback back and forth from us. But really, the reason I'm here and the reason I'm so excited about this is the most fun I've had teaching in years. It is so much more rewarding to come into class and work with students than it is to stand up here and give a lecture and have everybody clap at the end and then leave. So this is really a lot of fun from the teacher's point of view, and the students really loved it. All right, so now I'm going to go through some lessons learned here. And I want to make it clear, I don't have all the answers. So there are a bunch of questions that I have at the end of this. So students love this approach. They really, really appreciated this. It takes more time when you ask them, but they say it's worth it. So they appreciate that they are spending more time, but they're learning more. This is a good use of their time. One of the big problems with doing this in Sweden is that as soon as you tell students in Sweden they have to do anything, they revolt. You tell them, you have to watch this lecture before you come to class. You have to come to class to work on these practice problems. And they scream bloody murder. They just say, no, you can't force me to do anything. And so you need to give them some flexibility. But the good part here is that once they get going with this, they very quickly realize that this is the best way for them to learn, that it is worth their time to do it this way. It is more effective than whatever else they were going to do. And so as soon as they get going with this, they stop complaining. They realize this is a good way to learn, and they like it. But getting over that initial part, that's a little tricky. In particular, they like the interactive lectures. They use the ability to rewind a lot. They're going back and looking at things to review stuff. They're asking questions online, and they like the in-class practice problems. So the students really love this. From the teacher's point of view, this is a blast. It is so much more fun interacting with the students than just standing here lecturing. You get to know what the problem areas are and what the questions are before you come to class. This is great. You get to walk in and feel, super about yourself as a teacher that you're going to give them exactly the answer they need. And the students also get this positive feedback that they asked a question and they got a response. So this is very good for everybody. And as I said before, this is really the most fun teaching I've had. So one of the questions that always comes up when I talk about this is, how long does it take to record your lectures? I don't want to spend time recording my lectures. That's going to take too long. And this really isn't the part that takes time. So for recording lectures, you're recording them in short chunks. If you make mistakes, you only have to re-record 5 minutes. It takes somewhat more time than it takes to give the regular lecture. It's easy to get the software and hardware for this. So I use my iPhone headset. As long as it doesn't bang into your shirt, it works fine. You don't have to have expensive hardware to do this. So what I basically tell people is if you've got good lectures, then recording's the easy part. Now, given that I said that, producing questions is the hard part. And this is the part that really improves the class. It's forcing the students to interact by having good questions for them. So I had a bunch of questions in my class. I had these 1-minute questions, the online quizzes, 10-minute questions. These are the ones they did in class as the peer practice problems. And then we had sort of 100-minute questions. These were the at-home assignments. In my class, it was labs. So we talked about this before. Identifying key concepts from the lecture is hard, and making good multiple choice questions. It takes time. For the in-class questions, it takes a while to come up with good questions. You want to develop multi-part questions so the students can start on them and you can help them through them. And you also want to figure out how to address different levels of difficulty in the students. So I had some students who finished them very quickly, some who finished them slowly. How do you handle that? And then for the longer questions, those were just the regular labs I had. But there are a bunch of things I don't know about this. I don't know what the right kind of questions are. I don't know how many questions. And I don't know how hard they should be. This is stuff I'm still learning as I go along. And until we have a bunch of experience, we're not going to have any good advice on this. The last thing I want to focus on is adapting to feedback. So when I ran this class, I got more feedback for every lecture than I'd gotten for the entire course in the past. So I had 12 lectures, so I was getting 12 to 15 times as much feedback as I had before. And as a teacher, I'm just not used to doing that. I don't know how to handle that. So on every lecture, I got comments about what should be better. Does that mean I have to go fix all my lectures? How do I triage these comments? If I got 200 comments on a lecture, how do I effectively go through and figure out the important ones? I'm going to run this course again next year, and I'm going to have 400 comments for every lecture. It's the same lecture. How do I go and combine that to figure out what should I really improve in the lecture? I don't have the answers to these. You also get new types of feedback. Well, how do I interpret it when a student clicks the confused button? I don't know. How do I interpret it when they pause the lecture? Are they just going to get a snack, or are they having a problem? How do I use these self-assessment quiz results? These are all new things for me. The other part that's difficult as a teacher is having a whole bunch of your students point out errors. So I had a class where 40% of my students pointed out errors. That would be like everybody on this side of the room raising your hand and saying, there's an error on your slide. That's never happened to me before, and this is difficult to deal with. I had 30 students, and these were the errors that were pointed out for one class. That's a lot of errors. And psychologically, this is difficult for me to deal with. Now, when I step back and think about it, I shouldn't be focusing on this 40%. I should be asking, why did the other 60% not find the errors? But I've never had this kind of data before. I've never had this interactivity, so I don't know how to deal with it. So this is new stuff for me as a teacher as well. All right, so where do I want to move forwards with this? I want to get more teachers and more courses, and particularly move out of IT. So starting this fall, I think we have 7 new courses at Uppsala that are going to be run this way, and 3 or 4 KTH that are going to be taught this way. So that's going to be great to learn what those teachers need. I want to increase student activity, more types of self-assessment quizzes. I showed you some of these, arrows, boxes, ordering things. Peer grading. Peer grading is where you get an assignment in, and then you give each student 3 other students' assignments to grade. And they get the answers, and they have to grade them, and you look to see how good a job they did on grading them. This helps with grading, but it's mostly a way for students to learn. They see how other students solve their assignments. I think this is a very powerful teaching technique. Integrating it with exams. If I can connect all these questions students are answering during their lectures with how they do on the exam, I can predict next year who's at risk for failing the class. I can tell students early on, you have an 80% chance of failing this class based on how you're doing the lectures. What can I as a teacher do if I can identify those students early on? And I also want to learn from other subjects what they need to teach. I'd love to work with people, say, in art history. How would they use a system like this? But the biggest problem for getting the system adapted is really reducing teacher overhead. It's teacher time. As I said at the beginning, my promotion is based on my research, not on my teaching. And that's true for almost everybody. And so there isn't a lot of time, there aren't a lot of resources for improving your teaching in that regard. So we need better tools for teachers. That's why we're developing the system, trying to focus on making it easy for teachers. We need best practices guides. If you guys want to start this off, what are the top 5 things you need to watch out for? And we need to enable sharing of content. This is the way we save teachers time. So sharing between teachers is great, but it's a little tricky. We did that this spring. I had my class, and another colleague of mine taught the class. He used my online lectures, my quizzes, my questions, and taught the class. This saved him a lot of time. He didn't have to prepare the lectures. But it's difficult to teach with someone else's material. We have to learn how to make that easier. At Uppsala, we're particularly interested in how can we share content with Gotland after our merger with them. I also have colleagues at Chalmers and KTH who said, hey, we're all teaching computer architecture. Can we share this stuff? Do we all have to do our own courses, or can we each do a third of the course and put it together? So that will start reducing the amount of time teachers take. So if any of you guys are teaching and would like to try this in your class, I'm very interested in talking to you. Contact me, and I'm happy to sit down and discuss what you're doing and how this might work. The steps forward are basically prepare a few test lectures. Take a lecture that you have, try splitting it up into these short segments, figure out what these quizzes are, both the quizzes in the lecture and the quizzes you're going to have in the class. then go ahead and record it. This takes some time, but this isn't the big time deal. The big deal is in the preparing the questions. And then go ahead and test it with your students. We're happy to have people try out our system and see how well it works. And when you do test this with your students, make sure you tell them why you're doing this. The students really appreciate understanding why you think this is going to improve their learning. And you can collect a lot of feedback on what they think and how it's working. So to conclude, this worked great. It increased interactivity. And the reason I'm here is the students loved it, and this was the most fun I've had teaching in a long time. And personally, I can't imagine teaching any other way after this. So I'd really encourage you all to give it a shot as well. So thank you very much.
Visst är det häftigt? Vi ska ta frågor här. Hur skulle det fungera inom humaniora och samhällsvetenskap?
So that's a great question, because what I showed you was sort of engineering type stuff. There was a great example here in that the institution at Uppsala that does the most distance online education is theology. They have more online courses than any other department at Uppsala. And they make this work fine. And the way they do it is students interact through discussion forums. They write back and forth to each other. And this forces the students to reason out what they're doing and think about what they're doing. And so this clearly can work very well in that context. How do you actually put interactive questions in a lecture like that? I don't know. I need to talk to these people and figure out, if they take 10 minutes of their lecture, what are the two key concepts and how would they test those two key concepts? And then we need to figure out from that, how do we build quick questions which will allow them to get feedback from the students?
Nästa fråga är om programvaran är tillgänglig för lärare och vilka program som du har gjort dina föreläsningar i.
So the platform we have right now is one we're developing, and it's currently sort of in a beta situation. We've had a class with 130 students, and it worked. As I said, we have a bunch of classes scheduled for the fall. It is available for teachers. The problem we have right now is we don't want to be too spread out in helping teachers. Right now, when I have a new teacher get on board, I want to spend time with them to understand what's working and not working for their way of teaching. And that's really the limiting resource for us. But this is something that we've been developing in collaboration with SIX, and we're developing it ourselves because we didn't find any platforms out there that were focused on helping teachers in class. And that's really the focus of our platform. How can we use this online information to improve in-class teaching for teachers?
Nästa fråga är att studenterna lär ju sig väldigt bra i den här kursen som vi såg, men lär de sig att lära sig?
So that's a sort of tricky question to answer. What I can say from talking to students is that they want to get these in-class quizzes right the first time. They're not graded. This is purely for their own information, but they actually rewind the video if they don't know the answer to try and find out the answer. They feel challenged to try and get the right answer. So they're going through and they're trying to learn this stuff. Now, the sort of meta question is, are those the right questions to learn? And this is why I get back to building the questions is hard. The students are going to spend time thinking about these questions. You want to make sure they're the right questions. If you have the right questions in there, and the students are spending time trying to think about the answer, then yes, they're learning how to do the right thing.
Tack så mycket. Vi avslutar där. Tack igen, David.
Thank you.